If you think about it, there are people who have to go to a job and they have to do it every day. Half of their waking life is spent doing something that they dread, they fear, they tolerate. 70% of the workforce is in a form of hell. That to me is a humanitarian crisis. My cause is it doesn't have to be like this.
Welcome to another episode of the executive series Behind the Curtain of Leadership. I'm your host, Jamie Minton, and today we're joined by a leader who has spent decades mastering the art of culture and leadership development. Ben Ortlip started his career in advertising, writing for major clients, but soon transitioned into a new focus, helping organizations shape and sustain meaningful cultures. Ben's work has taken him into leadership and culture consulting with some of the biggest names in business, including Chick-fil-A, Zaxby's, and the Drucker Institute. He's become an expert in understanding how culture drives engagement and performance within companies. I'm excited to learn more about Ben's journey, his new book, Culture is the New Leadership, and the framework he's developed to help companies thrive in today's evolving workplace. Please join me in welcoming Ben Ortlip to the show. Ben, it's great to have you here, sir.
I'm excited.
Thank you for being here at LeaderPass Studios. And
This place is amazing, by the way.
well, thank you. As are you. I want to talk about your world that you have created over the last 20 years. I think you and I met, though, first of all, about 24 years ago.
Hey, we go back a ways.
We go way back. And then gaps where we didn't really spend any time. I won't take offense to that.
No,
But
none taken here either. So
yes. But let's talk about family first. You've got, I know, as we're filming this, a week out from your third daughter's wedding, which is really exciting. So tell me about your family and just kind of give viewers a little background.
probably the biggest thing to know about our family is that we do have 8 kids. And so that keeps us in about 3 different generations of child rearing.
Wow.
So we are into some of the marriage season now, and still have some teenage boys at home.
Okay. So ages go from
30 down to 15.
Okay.
So we're driving, we're not driving, we're getting married, we're dating, we're going to college, we're going to graduate school. We're kind of all over the place.
And this isn't a blended family. This is
ate the hard way.
Ate the hard way.
Yeah. No twins. It's fun.
That is great.
Never a dull moment.
Yes. And we were talking about, I think I was talking to Jordan the other day on our team, and he's got 2. And he says, man, that just kind of stresses me out. And I said, well, I think you get to a point where you figure out your system and your process for your family. And then do some of the kids start kicking in later, I guess, in life?
I noticed some of that. I've always said that the transition from 2 to 3 was the hardest.
Okay.
You go from 0 to 1 and everybody's, completely focused and dialed in. And then you go from 1 to 2 and you kind of rinse and repeat, and you still have 1-to-1, one-on-one defense. But then the transition from 2 to 3, you're thinking, okay, I'm an old pro at this now. And you sort of miss, or at least we did, the transition from, to zone defense. And it completely that was the one that completely overwhelmed me.
Isn't that something? Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, I always say, if you can handle 3, you can handle any number, because by the time you have your 4th or 5th, they're starting to help.
Okay.
And contribute to the cause some. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so we have a big full family. And speaking of culture, we kind of had to figure out some things.
I was going to say.
For family culture.
I bet you did. And experience that, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of failures.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything like as just in case someone's in that era of life and going from 2 to 3, any advice you can give before you jump into your culture stuff?
Well, I mean, the solution for all parenting is just be a person who prays and is humble and resist the idea that you know it all. I've found that there's a humbling experience right around every corner. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yep. That is good. That could probably be transitioned into any part of life,
I
I
mean,
guess.
even just real recently, with some of our younger kids, some of the mistakes I've made in the last month, and just having to go back and eat crow and own it, and realize that I was way off base in my philosophy and approach. I could go into details on that, but it's just, for me, it's been one thing after another. I always thought that, when I became a parent, it would be like, um, okay, I've been a parent for 4 or 5 years now, but it changes so frequently, um, that it's a lot like anything. You're constantly learning and you're constantly adapting and changing, and so is the world around you. So
Yeah. So you actually, your oldest, if I think through that for a second, you have had the full spectrum of the introduction of cell phones, the introduction to kids with having phones
that's
or
right.
not, and social media.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. So is there anything you've seen or anything y'all have implemented over the years to navigate that? Um,
I don't think we've done it well. I think we haven't been super aggressive or militant about it.
mhm.
There may have been a season early on where I sort of saw myself as, totally in control of that kind of stuff. And I think it's just so hard to actually do. So, we're not like a technology free family or anything like that.
Mhm.
So no, I'm not an expert at that. I appreciate the offer there, but
You've let it
I
fly,
don't really
basically.
have anything
That's hilarious.
of value to add for
Yeah.
that one.
You probably have observed, though. I mean, I guess watching, the kids, I think about the access points that we even
Yeah.
just did with two and years
Yeah.
ago, but it has to be interesting to navigate that with over the years.
Yeah. I mean, probably the best thing about cell phones is it gives you a very motivating deprivation. If you want to ground somebody, just all you have to do is take away
Take the
their,
phone. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
take the technology away from them, and they're suddenly paying close attention to what you're
Yes.
saying.
I love it. I love it.
So
I think when we first met, you were, I want to say, in content creation, or you were doing some writing at the time.
mhm.
I don't know that. Were you categorized as a ghostwriter, or how would you kind of categorize yourself?
Yeah, so my career began in as a writer. In fact, it's kind of been a seamless journey in a way, but nothing that I ever would have anticipated. But looking back on it, so I started out in advertising, and right out of the gate, I went to a great school for that. Um, and I got recruited right out of school to some of the best agencies to write commercials
Hmm.
and work on big campaigns for, well-known companies. And so, yeah, right out of the gate, I was equipped to be a writer. I'd been an English major in college, and then I went to a special school for advertising after that, sort of got a graduate degree. Um, so it was creative writing,
Hmm.
and I got a really good job writing commercials and, doing print campaigns and all that kind of creative stuff, a lot of radio, for well-known clients. But there was, even though I made decent money, worked with celebrities, flying around doing high production stuff, there was something about it that I was just miserable.
Really?
Yeah. And I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. I just knew that I just didn't like it, and on paper, you couldn't have figured it out. What I didn't realize at the time was there was an epidemic of young professionals going through that same process.
Hmm.
So this would have been the late 80s,
Mhm.
early 90s. And lo and behold, that's about the time that Gallup started their famous Q12 survey, because disengagement was such a massive problem. Um, and nobody knew really how to deal with that. So I eventually just walked out of the job, just stopped going. I was the worst employee that you could possibly imagine. So I just said, you know what, I can't lie about this. I've got to just get out of here.
Wow.
So I didn't like walk in and quit.
Hmm.
What I did was I just started coming in later and later and leaving earlier and earlier. And I think I had I had a couple of convertibles in the garage at home, and I would just kind of tinker with them, kind of restoring them.
Mm.
And eventually, my boss called me in, and we had a conversation about what was going on. I was like, "Yeah, I just need to get away for a while." So
Wow.
I went right into freelancing.
And were you
It's
married at the time? Were you guys
Yeah,
married? Okay. Okay.
yeah. In fact, I announced that I was going freelance, I think 2 to 3 months before we got married.
Oh,
So,
wow. Well, that had to be exciting.
yeah,
That was, yeah.
but there wasn't as big a leap. Actually, the way it worked was you could freelance and really make twice as much money
Mm.
as a freelancer, and work about half the amount. So
Okay.
that wasn't a big scary cliff to
Yeah.
jump off or anything. Um, but when I started freelancing, it opened up the world to all different kinds of writing. So it turns out, by no plan of my own, I had learned the ultimate craft of writing as an advertising person. What 5 words are going to go on the billboard that
Right.
create emotional connection, that move people to, sentiment for the brand, stuff like that. And so then I was, realize it, but those are really sought after in corporate communications because, you can write with punch, and efficiency and clarity and all that. So I immediately got a pretty good career in corporate communications. And then people started reaching out to me about ghostwriting.
Mhm.
And, so I never meant to write term papers for a living, but I found that it was very interesting writing, long form, because you get into these topics. And the niche that I just happened to be invited into was, um, leadership and management,
Okay.
by no design of mine at all. But
Really?
people started, a lot of the thought leaders that you may have heard of in the space. Um, I did a little work for John Maxwell's group.
Hmm.
Um, did some things when I started working with Chick-fil-A on some of their leadership stuff. They partnered up with Henry Cloud, Ken Blanchard, Jim Collins, Patrick Lencioni.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of running around learning all their stuff. And um, I also worked directly with the Drucker Institute.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Peter Drucker is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So inadvertently, I ended up getting kind of like a street MBA in management and leadership.
Very cool.
And so all of this kind of came to a head for me, or full circle, when I got invited to work on culture stuff. And what I noticed right away was the people who wanted to talk about culture suddenly just didn't understand as much as leadership and management are very codified disciplines.
Yeah.
And there's, frameworks and very tangible metrics and things like that. But the minute people started talking about culture, it was very esoteric and, just sort of a lot of metaphors and a lot of best practices, but no like cohesive framework or comprehensive set of, things that you have to measure and metrics and all that. And so I scratched my head for a minute. I was like, wait a minute. Where can you go to like learn what this is?
Right.
And there wasn't any place. And I remembered something that Peter Drucker had said in one of his early books. He described how he had gotten started. And he said, basically that the Industrial Revolution happened, and now all of a sudden people were working, workforces were condensed into these small spaces, and there were these things called knowledge workers, which must have been really weird to think about the highest paid person as, not really doing any of the actual work. They're just managing it. So, but he had to go in and figure all that out. And he wrote about it, and he talked about having to, to manage that process. And one of the things he said in one of his books was that he was keenly aware that he was laying the foundations of a new discipline.
Oh, really?
And that one always stuck with me.
Yeah.
Because then I thought, well, that's how management got started. And then, when I looked at leadership, there was a point in the 20th century when, you know, before it, there weren't like books about leadership.
Right.
It
Right.
was just a higher level concept. And then after that point, leadership was one of the most prolific
It's
topics.
huge. I remember that surge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was mostly management.
Yeah.
And then you saw this uptick
Yeah.
and that surge. So this would have been kind of, give me time frame when you were kind of seeing this or diving in.
Well, I was seeing it in the 90s,
Okay.
and the
Okay.
2000s
Yeah.
even. And it wasn't until the 2000s when I got asked to actually ghostwrite a book about culture.
Okay.
And I was excited because I was like, oh, this is great. This person's a guru. I'm finally going to learn, what culture is. And because I've always wondered.
Yeah. Yeah. Most do.
And
Was that or discipline, the new discipline? Do you feel like that's what Peter Drucker was talking about, or he was?
no, he was talking about management.
Okay. Okay.
He was saying, hey, when I started, because everybody would ask him, you're the father of modern management. What's it like? How did you learn this stuff? And he would say, well, actually, he said, I was doing this for 10 years, helping companies figure this out. And he said there was very little about it. So I had to just get in there and figure it out. And he said, as I wrote about it, I was keenly aware that I was laying the foundations of a new discipline.
Okay.
And he wrote 39 books on the topic and really codified it for people. And that's why he's considered the father of modern management.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, people like Warren Bennis became the father of leadership, if you will. Of course, Stephen Covey's written books on it. Maxwell's famous for, but really, when I was working with the Drucker Institute, they used to say all stones tumble from Mount Drucker. Because if you go back through his 39 books, there's not a book produced in the last 30 years that isn't conceptually
really
founded in one of the things he already talked about.
Interesting. Yeah.
And most authors, if they're honest, will admit that.
Yeah.
But he was talking about management.
Okay.
He was saying, hey, this is, what I did. And then I'm not really familiar with anybody saying that about leadership. But those two observations, those two sort of shifts, those tectonic shifts in the way that I think of them as the operating system for organizations. They used to be run on management. They shifted around and most are kind of run around leadership. And we're starting to see a shift toward a new operating system, which I think is culture. And that's why the title of my book is Culture's the New Leadership. But it's kind of like the metaphor that I think of is, computers used to run on DOS,
Yeah.
and you just had the monochromatic screen and all that. And then Windows came along, and Windows was a new operating system that ran on top of DOS. So DOS didn't go away. It's actually still there.
Okay.
And the same thing's true of management and leadership. Management doesn't go away. It just took a back seat. Like you can't find management books in the bookstore, but there's a very large leadership section. I think in another 20 years, if bookstores were still around that far out, you would have a section on culture.
Because that's the next.
I don't know if leadership's going to fade quickly because it's the topic that everybody feels command of.
Well, I've spent time with a business owner not long ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and he said, very successful. He said, what he's seeing now is that people don't want to manage. They don't like to manage. They don't like the what comes with that, I guess. And so I think the perspective of watching management and thinking back 80s and even 90s, and then leading, you have to learn how to do it. You have to be a good leader to do it, but it's way different than.
What's the distinction between management and leadership?
That's a great question. I think management has so many components of it that are, and I'll give you that definition, but management as measuring, and it's very tactical and it's very, you're overseeing. And then the difference between that and leadership, of course, I grew up with the definition from John Maxwell, which is leadership is influence.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And it's more of a soft skill all these years. And I think about comparing that to management. I believe the thought was management, you're getting in there and you're having to oversee others, make sure they're doing their job, make sure something happens every day, which is vitally needed. In fact, I think more more than ever, with what I'm observing, that is a necessary ability. If you've got a great manager and someone who can do that and get along with the people, then you're in good shape. Leadership, it's a little harder to put your finger on for years and years.
Yeah.
And that's why, but there are laws, there are, obviously books
Right.
galore on that. That would be my quick answer to what I heard them say. And I think they may be talking more about our generation now.
Yeah.
How would you categorize it?
I'm not, I mean, it's a longer conversation, I think, the difference between the two. I agree with you that management tends to describe tactical type things as opposed to strategic things. I think another thing about the difference between leadership and management is proximity, that management implies a close, monitoring and remediation of activities in order to produce a result, whereas leadership is starting to delegate some of the monitoring and remediation down the chain a
So the
little
distance
bit.
is it more?
Yeah, so the proximity grows,
Yeah.
and it's interesting how what fascinates me and what I follow, what I really noticed was the difference between all those disciplines was how each one corresponds to a different set of employee needs. So management did a great job as an operational or organizational discipline. It did a great job of speaking and providing directly the things that employees needed at the time. So when management became the popular operating system for organizations, it just so happened that there were a lot of employees, the majority of the employee workforce um, was in a set of needs that we can categorize as survival level needs. They primarily wanted a way to feed their families and live indoors.
Yeah.
And so, if you go back to the 20th century, the early 20th century, um, I mean, people were getting on a boat and leaving their homeland, risking life and limb to travel to a new country, just so that they could meet those survival needs. So that's management. And then, Maslow predicted that once a set of needs is met, we don't stop needing things, our needs evolve. And so if you just simplify Maslow's hierarchy down to sort of 2 or 3 levels, we have survival, and then we have the next level would be this success is kind of the primary bucket for all the psychosocial needs that fall into that. Basically, people wanted opportunity and they wanted advancement and they wanted maybe some esteem and recognition, those kind of things. Management didn't really deliver those. And so companies, in order to keep people engaged, they sort of gravitated toward leadership skills because the leadership as a discipline does provide sort of a bigger picture understanding of why are we all working? What are we doing? What do we produce for the world? What's our cause or our purpose? It's the opportunity to advance yourself, because you could start out as a line worker and you could work your way up into a leadership role, and so you get an esteem boost out of that. You get some credibility in the world around your community and so forth. And this is when you saw really the explosion of the middle class. This when the yuppies were invented. The community sprawl started. People were owning homes, which was something that really hadn't happened before. And then we get to the difference between leadership and culture, leadership and management culture. And to me, the discovery that was most significant was the realization that for the first time in the history of mankind, the workforce today has reached what Maslow called self-actualization. And so if you play that back onto Maslow's hierarchy, we had survival, we had success. And so now you have the millennial workforce in pursuit of significance, motivated by significance. Not as much motivated by survival because most of them have never known a time when they were
Right.
wondering where their next meal was coming from. And even advancement and esteem are all things. I mean, we're talking about the soccer trophy generation. They get that as a compulsory, it's an expectation for them.
Hmm.
So if you put someone in that environment, Maslow would tell us the next thing that they're going to start asking is, you know, how do I self actualize? How do I, um, matter in the world and things like that? And so the discovery that I made in my research is that there's sort of three ways that people express their self actualization. They either pursue a craft and get good at something, they either pursue a cause, something they can believe in, or they pursue community, a sense of belonging.
Hmm.
And so, I think we all sort of pursue all three of those. But what was interesting is that we've been able to create a typology around those three drivers, and they're distinct. You'll find some people are motivated purely by craft or purely by cause or purely by community. And it really affects the way that you try to engage them
Hmm.
in work. So that to me is the primary function of the discipline of culture.
Those three
Yeah.
things there. And you said the research you did, is that from working with
Yeah, just
companies over
working
the
with
years?
companies.
Okay.
So I was a ghostwriter,
Yeah.
and then I started, working closely with these, gurus essentially. And after a while, I started getting invited, in ride-alongs with, um, different companies. And like when I did all the stuff for Chick-fil-A, um, I was sort of just more involved in just the writing and producing, but working with the company too in terms of, how do we disseminate that out to the. So there was just sort of a blurry transition from writing about stuff to talking about it and coaching companies through that. And so, um, pretty early on, I remember the first company that just, right out said, we want help with culture was actually Zaxby's.
Oh, really?
And so Zaxby's, they had a transition. They were about 25 years old, and they had, a great run. People love Zaxby's. They're a great company. The founders are just salt of the earth, just wonderful
Based
people.
where are they based?
They're out of Athens.
Okay. Okay.
And so wonderful franchisee base. It was all just sort of, family and friends things. So they're a solid foundation. But, they reached a certain size and they were just going, wow, the culture is so spread now that it's
Mhm.
hard for us to understand how to impact that. So um, that's, one of the companies we went in and just did a full, what's called an ethnography, just kind of a deep dive research study of the psychology of everybody, the franchisees out in the field, the corporate headquarters, the frontline workers, and just like what's going on. You kind of get a profile
Hmm.
of the psychometrics.
Was it all assessments that you would use and just go?
Most of it was just conversations. That's
Really?
the thing
Okay.
about ethnography is there's no, uh, it's a discipline, but it's very open ended
Okay.
because any discipline you apply to it could leave out very important artifacts. So the idea with an ethnography is that you're just observing, and whatever's there, you follow it. So we just had conversations with people about what's it like here, um, what's your favorite thing, what's your least favorite thing, and then you go back and categorize this later. And that's in doing that is where I started going, oh, this is just like Maslow's hierarchy. And lo and behold, all these things that are down here are kind of management disciplines, are what you use to meet those. And then all the middle stuff is stuff that leadership is designed to address.
Hmm.
And then there's this top part. How do you address that? And that's where I came up with craft, cause, and community as the sort of three languages of the millennial worker. Um,
Craft, cause, and community. They're the
yeah,
three things you were talking about.
yeah. So, but Zaxby's was a $750 million company at the time. And so we came back and we said, hey, here's a gap in your sort of culture and engagement.
Hmm.
Uh, here's another gap over here. And it was very intuitive how to fix it,
Okay.
um, and I could go into that. But so we worked with them for 3 years, just putting together campaigns to fix this, leadership training,
All
development.
internal, basically. All
Yeah, it's all just,
yeah.
the stuff that everybody already does,
Hmm.
but we were able to quantify it and say, you know, and isolate the things that need to be done. By the end of 3 years, they were a $1.5 billion company. They doubled in 3 years. And it's not like they hired new people or anything. It was like 82% were the same people.
Wow.
We
Okay.
just, created new engagement and the brand just took off.
That is awesome. And that experience and what you found and learned from that drove those three items and those three concepts
Yeah.
of
Actually,
craft culture
all
community.
so not just the top three, but there were, and this is the case with most companies, there were, we focus on seven in our framework. We focus on seven sort of management areas that
Mhm.
affect engagement and five sort of leadership areas that affect engagement. So 15 sort of psychometric categories in all.
Okay.
And you could really quantify this thing that people call culture. And so since then, I've been doing this probably 10 or 12 years now. We've done it in manufacturing and healthcare, transportation, several different industries, retail, and it's the same. People are humans, and wherever disengagement is down, um, it's for a reason. It's for
Mm.
some psychological reason that people are sort of, you know, just like I was as an employee. You can have a great job, but if there's a little thing missing, and I've been able to go back and understand why I didn't like that job.
Oh, really? Even for
Yeah,
yourself,
yeah.
how you do that? Okay.
And what they could have done as a company to fix it.
That's
So
awesome. That is awesome. So, where my head is when I think of these three things, are you saying that all three need to be met for culture to be optimized or get it to, or are you saying individually they may just live in one of those three?
so the three being craft,
Cause,
cause, and
yeah.
community, or the three being survival, success,
No, the craft, cause,
significance.
and community is where my head was when I.
Yeah. So for the millennial worker, um, it really depends because they're almost like love languages. You have people sometimes. I remember I did a poll at a software company, and just a casual poll. I think there were like 60 people in the room, and I said, "Raise your hand if you're craft software company."
Yep.
So all the hands go up.
Hmm.
Raise your hand if you're cause. Not a single hand went up. Raise your hand if you're community. One hand went up. It was the owner of the company. And everybody laughed.
Yeah, yeah.
And he goes, I guess we don't need to have company picnics anymore.
That's
And
classic.
actually, everybody just sort of was like, when you play that back, like it's a funny thing for him to say and everything. But the reality is, um, it was very taxing to have to go to a company picnic when all I want to do is put me in my closet, let me
Let me do my
write
thing.
some
Yeah,
code,
yeah.
do my thing, and then go home and meet my social needs the way I want to meet them, not the way the company. Stuff like that's super practical,
Yeah.
but it's also super helpful,
Hmm.
because stuff like that sort of burns the fuse for how long somebody wants to stay in a job.
Yeah. If they're having to do one of the C's, in that case that they're just not
Yeah.
gravitating towards.
So feed people that it's, vitamins is another sort of metaphor for that. It's like, if you're low in vitamin B, give them vitamin B. If they're a person who needs more calcium, give them what they need.
Mhm.
And the only way to understand that is to be measuring those things.
Okay.
So
And so do you advise in that scenario to shift the focus from the community and, to craft? Is that what is, and does that help the overall culture? Is that what you're suggesting? Is that
it
when you
helps.
identify?
Yeah. So let me give you another example. There was a healthcare company up north, and Um, this was one of those healthcare companies that provides in-home, long-term, it's a bad scenario.
Mhm.
And so these people come in and they just absolutely, angels, saving the day.
Mhm.
Families can't function without them. So it's a very cause-oriented environment. And initially, the person who founded the company was all about the cause. And the frontline people who decide that that's their career, they're doing it because a lot of it because of the cause, like they tend to be real serving people and everything else. But when the company over several decades became an $8 billion company, they had this whole group in the middle, that provide all the infrastructure. You've got HR people, accounting people, all of these tasks that have to be done just for organization's sake. And so, we're talking a couple thousand employees at least. And they would have this annual meeting every year. And it had been since the beginning the tradition to show these incredible videos of, these patients and the relationship that developed between the frontline person and the patient. Well, for the 1,500 or so home office employees who would go to these things,
Yeah.
they were craft people.
They weren't cause.
They were community people sometimes, but they weren't cause people.
Mm.
An accountant is somebody who chooses to do accounting for a living. It's just less likely that they're going to be a cause person. So they had this just massive group of people in the middle who felt almost ignored.
Mm.
And, like the prodigal brother who, all of the love was being lavished upon the frontline workers. And of course, the founder, felt like this is great. This is why. And so that's an engagement problem.
Wow.
And so you'll have higher turnover when you do that, and nobody will know why. It's just sort of in the back of your subconscious. It's like, I just don't feel as appreciated here. All they had to do was show some, a couple of videos about all the incredible people in the middle who hold it all together.
Yeah.
All they had to do was, celebrate craft and the development of skills that are so vital. So there's some things they could do to emphasize the parts that matter to those people.
Yeah.
But if you're unaware of the typology, those three different needs, then you can't speak them.
Yeah. Okay. So why is culture in your mind the new leadership? This is your new book. By the way, you're a ghostwriter. You've written a bunch for others and for clients, but is this like your first Ben Ortliff book, or have you written another book prior to this one?
Well, my name ended up on another book because they didn't ask me. They just put my name on there.
Okay.
Which, it wasn't great for my ghostwriting career, but so they outed me. But this is the first time I've said, you know what, I have something to say.
Okay. And was that an unusual experience for you to say, okay, I think I'm ready?
It was hard. It was hard because when you're writing somebody else's book, there's a deadline, and you're totally. For this book, I was the guy in charge, and so, which is so dangerous. So, I mean, it took over 10 years to write it. I started, and to be honest, what I wrote early on wasn't worth reading. It was me trying to figure stuff out. So, and then like 2 years ago, I started finally, feeling like, okay, this is baked now. I think it's ready. And I feel good about it. So yeah, my name's on the cover, which is kind of weird. I don't know if it's a personality type or if I just got used to being behind the scenes. There's a lot of comfort of being invisible.
Sure.
There's a lot of, there's a major escape hatch, if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
But, I've also learned that a book is just a book, nobody notices much about, what I'm saying? It's like it all becomes the wallpaper.
Right.
To everybody except your mom,
So, but you feel like, so when you think about culture as the new leadership, how did you connect there? Why, after the 10 years of writing this, did that?
Man, it's because something happened in the 90s. Something happened in the 90s. And that's what I wrote about in the first several chapters of the book. There's a video that I created that describes it too, but something happened in the 90s. And what happened was, basically since the Industrial Revolution, the workforce has been moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
Nobody's been talking about it. Nobody's been monitoring it or anything. But basically, you know, we kind of were motivated by the survival stuff in the beginning. And then, several years goes by and that's become sort of commoditized. We're going to definitely give you a place where you can earn money, you can pay your bills, you can pay the rent, you can buy food. All you have to do is show up and do what we tell you to do. And if you don't want to do it, there's 12 guys at the chain link fence
Who wants to
waiting
do
for
it?
their turn.
Yeah.
And then so that becomes baked in. And just like Mazzo said, our needs started to evolve. And so leadership had to come along and sort of be the thing that provided what people needed, a chance to move up in their career, to have a future, advancement, some recognition, and stuff like that. And then, so leadership and management were sort of, if you look 50 years ago, they were very prominently playing a role in the way companies operated.
Mhm.
And what people missed was by the end of the 20th century, we didn't have, what happened was the workforce reached self actualization and nobody noticed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In fact, it's, you go back and look at previous civilizations throughout history, no other civilization has ever reached self actualization. In other words, the majority of the workforce has significant self actualization in their motivation.
Okay.
The reason that they're working is very motivated by the self actualization thing. That's never happened before in the history of
Hey,
mankind.
give me the definition of self-actualization in your book.
Self actualization is sort of a philosophical expression of identity. So
Okay.
there's a lot of great definitions about it, but it's basically where your self, your existential self, is connected to the work that you do.
Okay. The
It's
meaning
not just
behind it.
work is not an end, a means to an end. Work is the end unto itself.
Okay.
So before, I work because I'm hungry and I got to have food, and my existential pursuits happen completely separate from that. But when those two things aren't part of, my identity question, um, then I'm left. That's what basically self-actualization is.
Okay.
It's never happened before, and we didn't know how to motivate those people.
Hmm.
And so, we talk about this in the book, but a lot of things were happening in corporate America at the same time in the latter half of the 20th century. Companies were, let's just say, I don't want to use the word greed, but they were starting to do things for the benefit of the shareholders that was antagonistic to what the employees wanted, things like taking away pensions, downsizing, and, nothing wrong with trying to create efficiencies in a company, but a lot of times they do that at the expense of their employees.
Mhm.
So these are employees who are now reaching self-actualization and they're looking for, a sense of purpose in what they do, or a place to exercise their craft, or a sense of belonging to community.
Mhm.
And companies are, right sizing or downsizing and getting, so there was a real pandemic of disengagement happening. And by the time 1990 rolls around, Gallup starts their Q12 study in response to that. So why did I write this book? Because nobody's looking at the big picture. Nobody stepped back. Everybody just started talking about culture, but nobody really, that I saw, really understood the big picture of why this was happening.
Mm.
And it's because we've reached, for the first time in the history of mankind, a, a different kind of workforce motivated by completely different things. Um, I felt like solving that began with understanding the context that was happening to us in the workplace at large.
Right.
It's not just, hey, our people want to have more fun at work. So let's bring in, let's create a Zen room, or let's swap out conference tables for, a pool table, or let people have a casual Friday or bring their pet to work. There's all of these sort of impulsive responses to try to meet the needs of the workplace. Um, but until you really understand the kind of need behind the need,
Hmm.
you can take a shot and miss most of what really what's going to matter to those people.
Wow.
So
And the book is about how your observations, but also things that are tactical that can be applied, or are they?
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just sharing the journey that I've
Yeah.
been on for really 20 years or so. We're really going back to the time that if you include the job that I left, it's what, 40 years ago. But so yeah, the first couple of chapters of the book explain kind of the historical context for why culture, why all of a sudden it's the conversation about culture and not just leadership.
Hmm.
That's the transition that I saw. I remember the first time I got an assignment about culture. It was actually for the Maxwell organization,
Okay.
and one of the publications was that I guess produced or published was um, a focus on culture.
Mm.
And of course, I was just curating stuff from all these brilliant thought leaders, and putting them together in this thing. So I didn't have to think about it, but I was definitely watching
Yeah.
what are they saying about culture. So people started talking about it, but I didn't feel like anybody was stepping back and going, "Why are we suddenly talking
Yeah. Why
about
is this
culture?"
happening? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
why is it? Because this is a leadership company, and of course, leadership drives culture. There's a lot
Mhm.
of aphorisms like that floating around. Um, but I'm just enough of a wanderer that I just kind of went, gosh, why are all my clients talking about culture? And so the first several chapters try to explain it. I mean, I obviously did a lot of research to try to understand, what had happened in the last 100 years or 150 years and why. I mean, goodness, I went back to the Enlightenment and the pyramids. I was trying to understand, did they self-actualize, because they had concentrated workforce,
Mhm.
the density of workers, but I couldn't find any civilization that was self-actualizing. And
Yeah.
so the first few chapters talk about the historical context and what's going on psychologically with workers and the relationship, the different sort of social contracts that get formed between employees and employers, sort of the beyond pay expectations that
Mhm.
mostly go unspoken. And then the rest of the chapter, I mean, I ended up coming up with, you go into different companies and kind of do the ethnography thing for a while, and eventually you start to understand a pattern.
Okay.
And so, that ended up being a framework, the seven sort of management disciplines that you're measuring and checking, are those meeting the needs or are
Mm.
they any gaps? The five that are leadership oriented, and then the three craft causing community that speak to the pure self actualizing worker,
Oh yeah.
the millennial.
Yep.
So that's all in the framework.
Hmm.
Um, and that's described pretty thoroughly in the book
Yeah.
with descriptions about how you remediate if there's a gap in each of those.
And is that the foundation for what you call the culture MRI, which is
Yeah.
a great, I love the phrase, by the way. Super
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how well that translates. It's such a new category. It's such a new territory.
Yeah.
I feel like it has. But yeah, I mean, to find out where the healthy tissue is in the organization, you do an MRI, and MRI, of course, stands for Motivational Response Index,
Okay.
which is that framework that I
Yeah.
talked about. And yeah, there's now a software component to it, that the client gets a dashboard and they can, see the specific results and everything.
Yeah.
Um, so we're sort of, I mean, our sweet spot is doing diagnostics for companies.
Okay.
What's your state of your workforce? Um, and I've never been the greatest consultant. I've worked with some people who are amazing consultants, but I think my sweet spot has always been sort of quietly sitting in the corner and wondering about things. So I think our sweet spot is diagnostics. We can show you exactly what's healthy and unhealthy about the organization. In fact, we have algorithms now that allow us that enable us to tell you exactly what it's costing
Oh, wow. So you
in
can attribute
dollars.
that. Wow. Okay.
So if we can learn a little bit about the financials of the company, how much you're spending on labor, top line revenue, just a little bit about the relationship between um, revenue and employees and things like that. Um, and then we measure sentiment, employee sentiment.
Really? Okay.
There's a bunch of old white papers that have existed for a very long time that for some reason nobody ever made the connection. But basically, we're able, and this is all in our dashboard now.
Hmm.
The algorithms to say when the sentiment score is this, and all those other factors, a 1% shift in engagement is worth $460,000
Wow.
or whatever the number
Yeah.
is. In the big companies, it's millions.
Hmm.
And so we're able to go in and say, hey, your engagement score is 55. If we can get it to 60, it'll be worth an annual EBITDA improvement of, $100 million or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And then we can do the remediation work. And then at the end of the next year or the end of the year, we can measure again and those numbers should match.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So that's how, if someone was going to engage with you and your team, that is essentially how they would view, in addition to, of course, the book and learning from you, it's the diagnostic side. It's coming in and it's observing and it's putting them through the software to get a baseline.
Yeah.
And then do you work all year with that company and that client to do that, or time wise, or?
Yeah. Again, I think our calling is in the area of diagnostics.
Mhm.
So yes, we have clients that we work directly with. Um, I feel like so I yield there's a community of consultants out there who really are, I just don't feel like I'm in the same category as a consultant as a lot of these people. Um, and so uh, somebody like them, I mean, we do it in some cases, and there are some little special
Mhm.
skills and, playbook that we've run on certain things. Um, but nothing that really I've invented, it's
Mhm.
just matching up.
Gotcha.
Oh, when this is, like the simple one is leadership development, because the survey will tell us if they're developing leaders or if they have, you know, leadership density or
Mm.
if they're lacking in that area. And so, do you have a leadership model? Is it proprietary to you, or did you borrow it from some famous author and
Mm.
you're trying to shoehorn it into the company and it doesn't fit the culture and values? Are you teaching people that? Are you taking time, to work on the business and train them to that and amortizing the investment over, the life of the company as a capex versus an opex?
Mm.
Just stuff that you can do and should do in order to, improve the culture. And there's payback on that. That's why I love the dollar measurement of it,
Oh yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's one thing to say, oh, we probably ought to, train our leaders, and then so you're having a good year and the board approves it and you throw a couple $100,000 at it, but you never know
Yeah.
the outcome of it. So um, I think in the future, uh, people are going to insist on quantifying those things
Yeah.
and really understanding
Yeah.
what they're spending, and no more of this. Just, I mean, to be honest with you, I think most people are guessing when it comes to culture.
Hmm.
They stick a finger in the air in the wind and they go, I think, and they're usually just expressing what their own personal psychology is, just like the guy who raised his hand and was doing community stuff because that's what he would feel,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
instead of measuring it. So, but I think the day is coming when it'll be standard practice for culture and psychometrics to be, clear, quantifiable data. And, when you hear the word data, you think, oh, that's that stuff that only the computers understand. Well, that's not what I mean by it. I mean, we just need to be better students of what people need in order to thrive in the workplace.
Mm.
And yes, it's psychological, and yes, it's subconscious most of the time, but it's also right there. You
Right,
know,
right.
people need compensation for what they do. People need a reasonable workplace environment. People need a reasonable workload. They need stress load to be managed. They need a career path to advance on. So there's all of these different things that if I explain them to you like that, it's, practical and obvious.
Hmm.
But all of the processing of that happens in the subconscious
Yeah.
because we're all busy doing our jobs and nobody's paying attention to that stuff. That's the stuff that causes people to walk away from a job.
Wow.
That's the stuff that causes companies to get a bad reputation.
Mm.
Oh, don't work there. I heard it's hell.
Mm.
You know,
Mm. And well, so where do you see part of that being the future? Do you feel like culture is sticking here? When we talk about culture as the new leadership, is culture going to be with us?
yeah, I think
It
it
is with us.
is.
Yeah.
I think culture's the new leadership. I think leadership is still going to be there. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like management though, and all the books are about some other word. I don't know if they're going to call it culture or if they're going to call it, um, people.
Hmm.
That's the other thing. There's been if sort of, the three pronged progression has gone from product development to process development, and now it's people development. So there's all these different triads
Hmm.
that you can look at like that. So yeah, I think the day could come. I wouldn't be surprised if leadership books start to disappear.
Hmm.
And again, there won't be bookstores anymore, but
Right.
if there were, it would be, whatever this new discipline gets called,
Yeah.
culture. Um, and uh, here's the big thing. The big sort of historical drivers for this. Number one is, the disengagement epidemic that started all of this in the 80s and 90s. Okay, that's a fact. It happened, and we've been trying to fix that for the last 35 years and failing miserably
Hmm.
because Gallup admits they've been monitoring this. The number has never moved.
Hmm.
They send out the Gallup, Q12 survey report every year for 35 years, and it's always in the low 30s.
Same. Yeah.
It's always in the, and their annual reports will always say, once again, the number hasn't moved. That's fantastic for the consulting business, right? Because it's like you don't want healthy people and you don't want dead people. You want the people in the middle. That's where the money is.
Yeah.
So there's all these companies that are not dead and they're also not healthy. And so, you know, trillions of dollars get spent working on those. But that's a historical fact. The disengagement epidemic happened. Here's another historical fact. There's a demographic cliff coming in the next 5 years. So colleges and universities are dealing with this in 2025. That's the first year that the population growth has just dropped off, and it's traced to the recession that happened in '08.
Really.
Yeah, so people, recession comes along, economic hardship, parents go, we better not have any more kids. I mean, this is a literal thing.
Wow.
17 years later, college admission drops off. Duh.
Yeah.
So that's hitting colleges, and they've been, talk about leading indicators. They've had basically 2 decades to prepare for this moment,
Right. Right.
and they are. We do some work with some universities, and their strategies around that, and they're shifting things. But 4 years beyond that, those same people hit the workplace. And so you're looking at fewer people entering the workforce. If you think the competition for great talent is bad now,
It's gonna be crazy.
it's going to get worse
Wow.
in 5 more years. So culture is going to be the key. The companies that understand, embrace, and thrive at this new discipline are the ones who are going to emerge with the advantage. And the ones who miss it just, by negligence or oversight, God help them.
Wow. Well, I'm certainly excited about what you're doing in this space and who you're helping, and excited about your new book. and our conversation and where things are going. Let's talk about where, if people want to engage
Yeah.
with you, where do they go to? What, maybe a website or
Yeah.
social?
So our website's theculturemri.com.
Okay.
Um, the other place, so there's probably, let's say, two kinds of audiences that so we do this directly for companies, sure,
Mhm.
but I think our calling is not to build some mega agency that, it consults with all these different companies. We've really set ourselves up to be sort of the diagnostic arm for the vast community of extremely talented consultants that are out there.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
consulting firms, there's a lot of solopreneurs who do
Yep.
this very well, and they have the relationships with their customers. This is a great streamlined tool to help them understand what the greatest needs of the organization
Wow.
are. And if I can pick on the consulting mindset for just a minute, people tend to sell what they have in the shelf, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of consultants traditionally, either they'll be inspired by something somebody wrote or a course that they took, and it's their bias to go in and emphasize and sell that to a company. We're offering them something that's diagnostic in nature. In other words, just like an MRI can save you surgeries, it can also save you a life.
Mm.
Um, the culture MRI can point you in the direction that's going to have the greatest impact
Okay.
for your client. It actually could be a selling tool,
Mm-hmm.
Consultative selling tool. Hey, look, the data says, and this is objective, data, that this is going to have impact, and we're going to be able to measure the impact in dollars and in EBITDA.
It's powerful.
So that's the other way that we would engage with somebody. If you're a consulting firm or if you're a cottage person, we have an affiliate program.
Okay.
And if you're not sure about the remediation, we've got all that mapped out. You can either do it yourself or we can connect you with people who specialize in certain things.
It's awesome.
And hopefully, our goal is for there to be actually an effective consulting community. Here's my cause. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a craft person, obviously,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But my cause, if I think back, is I've got children now who are starting to experience the workplace, and some of them have run into the same malaise that I hit when I was. So, the Q12 survey didn't cure anything.
Right.
It hadn't even moved the needle. So, if you think about it, I was a person who had to go to work, let's say. In my case, I had an out, but there are people who have to go to a job and they have no option, and they have to do it every day, every work day. Half of their waking life is spent doing something that they dread, they fear, they tolerate, according to Gallup's own data. 70% of the workforce is in a form of hell. And so if you think about it, what is it, 150 million North American people wake up every day to that. That to me is a humanitarian crisis. My cause is it doesn't have to be like this. If we just understood the psychology, the psychometrics of the workplace, we could give people fulfillment and satisfaction. And, I want that for people in general. I especially want it for my kids.
Sure.
I want them to. I watched one of my daughters, I won't say which one, but I watched, her do incredible at a job over the last 3 years. Um, and yet little by little, she would start going, and she'd describe a situation. And I'm sitting there, as a person who works on stuff like that, I'm going, L3, M4, and just thinking of the remediation that should be happening. And the bosses are oblivious.
Wow.
And so I'm writing a book, because the people need to understand it'll benefit them, it'll benefit their employees, but we can end the humanitarian crisis, or we can put a big dent in it at least, you know.
That's awesome. That's
So
awesome. Well, love it. Well, man, it's been great having you here. I want to do more with you. I want you to come back. And I think you've got in you a lot of lessons based on the book, but also based on these stories that you've watched firsthand. So I
yeah,
hope you come back and spend time with us. But thank you for being here
I love
today.
it. Thank you, Jamie.
All right, man, up high.